Imagine walking into your local pharmacy, rolling up your sleeve, and giving a single drop of blood from your finger. And from that one drop, no needles, no vials, no waiting, a machine tells you whether you have cancer, diabetes, high cholesterol, hundreds of conditions in minutes for a fraction of the price. It would be one of the most important medical breakthroughs in human history.
Elizabeth Holmes promised the world a medical revolution. At 19, she claimed to have invented a miniaturized machine that, with a single drop of blood, could map our health.
That was the promise. And the woman who made it became, on paper, the youngest self-made female billionaire in the world. Her company was worth $9 billion. Investors threw money at her. Presidents posed with her. Magazines put her on their covers and called her the next Steve Jobs. There was just one small problem. The machine did not work. It never worked. And she knew. This is the story of how a 19-year-old college dropout built a $9 billion empire on a lie, convinced some of the most powerful people on earth to believe it, and put real patients in real danger before it all came crashing down. But here is the part that should unsettle you the most. This was not a sudden collapse. It took more than a decade. And for almost all of it, the people who could have stopped it chose not to look too closely. So how does a fraud this big stay standing for this long? Stay with me.
When I started our company, someone said to me, define what is non-negotiable to you, what you're willing to fight for, die for, and most importantly, live for. For me, that non-negotiable is our mission.
This is Theranos. To understand the lie, you first have to understand why everyone so desperately wanted it to be true. And that starts with the founder. Her name was Elizabeth Holmes. In 2002, she enrolled at Stanford University to study chemical engineering. She was brilliant, intense, and obsessed with a single idea. She wanted to be the next great Silicon Valley visionary. She idolized Steve Jobs so completely that she began wearing his uniform, the black turtleneck, every single day. She even, some say, deliberately lowered her speaking voice to a deep baritone to sound more commanding in rooms full of older men. At 19, she dropped out of Stanford to chase her vision. The idea was simple and beautiful. Most people hate needles. Blood tests are slow, expensive, and require vials of blood drawn from your arm. What if you could run the same tests, hundreds of them, from a single prick of the finger? A few drops into a tiny container she called the nanotainer, fed into a sleek machine she named the Edison. Healthcare revolutionized. It was the kind of story Silicon Valley falls in love with. A young, charismatic founder, a world-changing mission, a product that would save lives. And the money followed. By the early 2000s, Theranos had raised more than $700 million from venture capitalists and private investors. Its valuation soared to $9 billion. Holmes, who held half the company, was suddenly worth $4.5 billion. But it was not just the money that made Theranos untouchable. It was the people Holmes gathered around her. Her board of directors read like a list of the most powerful men in America. Former secretaries of state, former defense secretaries, retired generals, senators. These were not biotech experts. They were titans of politics and the military, lending their towering reputations to a blood-testing startup most of them did not understand. It went further still. Some of the most famous money in America bought in. A media mogul who owned one of the largest news empires on the planet personally invested over $100 million. One of the wealthiest retail dynasties in the country put in a fortune. A major pharmacy chain staked its reputation on her. Each new, powerful name made the next one feel safe. After all, if people that rich and that smart had done their homework and invested, surely the technology must be real.
Every lab test that we develop should be submitted to the FDA. Lab tests historically have not been regulated by FDA.
Nobody seemed to realize that almost none of them had actually checked. They were not investing in a blood test. They were investing in each other's confidence and in Holmes herself. And that was the genius of it. Who would dare question a company backed by names like that? There was just one thing all that power and prestige could not do. It could not make the Edison machine actually work. Because behind the glass walls of Theranos headquarters, the technology was failing badly. The Edison was supposed to run hundreds of different tests from a single drop of blood. In reality, it could barely run a handful, and even those produced wildly unreliable results. The dream of testing for everything from one finger prick simply was not possible with the science they had. The machine that the entire $9 billion company was built on was, in plain terms, broken. Now, put yourself in Holmes's position for a moment. The money has been raised, the board is stacked with legends, magazine covers are being printed, and the product at the center of it all does not function. A normal person admits the problem, slows down, goes back to the lab. What happened instead is where this story stops being about a failed startup and starts being about fraud. Because rather than admit the Edison did not work, Theranos decided to hide it. When investors and partners came to see the technology in action, the company staged elaborate demonstrations. They would take a visitor's blood sample, place it into an Edison machine with great ceremony, and let them watch it begin processing. But once the visitor left the room, the sample was quietly removed and run on something else entirely. There is an account of a visit from a sitting vice president of the United States, given a tour of a gleaming, state-of-the-art lab that was, in part, a stage set built to impress him. The demonstrations were theater. The machine was a prop. But that wasn't even the most dangerous part. Because Theranos did not keep this technology behind closed doors, they took it to the public. In 2013, the company struck a deal with Walgreens, one of the largest pharmacy chains in America, to put Theranos blood testing centers inside their stores. Real patients, ordinary people, began walking in and giving their blood, trusting that the results they received were accurate. They were not. And this is the moment the lie stopped being a financial scandal and became a human one. Here is what was actually happening behind the scenes. Theranos knew the Edison could not be trusted.
So they're lab results. So in the same way as you get a lab report from a traditional doctor's visit, and they tell you your cholesterol, your glucose, your chemistry panel, your blood count.
So for the vast majority of the tests it sold to the public, the company secretly used ordinary, commercially available blood testing machines. The very machines made by rival companies that Holmes had publicly mocked. The old technology her revolutionary device was supposed to replace. The great Silicon Valley breakthrough was quietly running its tests on equipment anyone could buy. And even that did not save them. Here is the problem they had backed themselves into. Those rival machines were designed to test a normal amount of blood, a proper vial drawn from the arm. But Theranos had sold the world on the finger prick, just a few tiny drops. A few drops is not enough blood to run on a machine built for a full sample. So to make it work, the technicians had to water the blood down, diluting that tiny sample to stretch it far enough to test. And when you dilute a blood sample, you change it. You push readings outside the range the machine can measure accurately. The very thing that made Theranos special on the outside, the single magical drop, was the thing quietly wrecking the results on the inside. The brand and the science were at war, and the science was losing. Patients were given test results that were simply wrong. Some were told they might be having a miscarriage when they were not. Some were given alarming readings about their health that sent them into a panic. Others were given falsely reassuring results that could have let a real, dangerous condition go undetected. People were making decisions about their bodies, their treatments, their lives, based on numbers that came from a system the company knew was unreliable. Hold that in your mind, because it is the true cost of this story, and it is not measured in dollars. But to keep a lie this size, hidden for this long, you cannot just fool outsiders. You have to control everyone on the inside too. And Theranos was built for exactly that. The company was famously, almost obsessively secretive. Different teams were kept walled off from each other, so that almost no single employee could see the whole picture. Staff were made to sign aggressive agreements, promising never to talk about their work. Those who raised concerns about the technology were sidelined, pushed out, or made to feel that the problem was their own lack of vision rather than the machine. Inside those walls, doubt was treated as disloyalty. For years, that fear worked. It kept the questions from ever reaching the outside world. So how does something like this finally unravel? Not through the board, not through the investors, not through the regulators who were supposed to be watching. It came down to a handful of ordinary employees who could not live with what they were seeing. Inside Theranos, young scientists had begun to notice that the data did not add up.
From a 900-patient study where we got FDA clearance of the exact system that the journal is questioning.
Test results were being quietly altered. Quality control checks that should have stopped faulty tests were being ignored. Two of them in particular, junior employees early in their careers, realized that what was happening was not just incompetence, it was deception, and it was putting patients at risk. One of them was the grandson of one of the most respected statesmen on the company's own board, which meant blowing the whistle would mean going up against his own family's name. They took an enormous risk, a far bigger one than they could have known. Because going up against Theranos did not just mean losing a job, the company unleashed its lawyers on them. The young whistleblowers were followed, threatened with lawsuits that could have bankrupted them and their families, and warned in no uncertain terms what speaking out would cost them. One of them spent his own savings and his family's simply defending himself against the legal machine of the company he was trying to expose. Imagine being in your early 20s, at the very start of your career, staring down some of the most powerful lawyers in the country, knowing that telling the truth might destroy you. Most people in that position stay quiet. They did not. They spoke to a journalist. That journalist was John Carreyrou of the Wall Street Journal. Acting on a tip, he began a quiet, months-long investigation, talking to former employees, patients, and doctors. Theranos fought back ferociously. The company's lawyers threatened the whistleblowers. They pressured the newspaper. Holmes herself went on television, dismissed the reporting as the work of a tabloid, and promised the world that Theranos would publish data proving its tests worked. That data never came.
We've already done it, absolutely, and it's actually even published in our FDA decision summary from this summer.
In 2015, Carreyrou published his investigation, and the story he told was devastating. That the Edison machine was barely used, that most tests ran on rival equipment, and that the results patients were receiving could not be trusted. The $9 billion company had been built on a product that did not exist as advertised. And now we arrive at the number. The company that was once valued at $9 billion, say it slowly, that's 10 zeros, and someone signed off on every single one. Within a matter of months, that $9 billion collapsed toward nothing. Forbes, which had once crowned Holmes the youngest self-made female billionaire on Earth, revised her personal net worth from $4.5 billion to zero. Not a little, zero. To put that collapse in perspective, $9 billion is more than the entire annual budget of some national health systems. It was built and then erased around a device that could not reliably do the one thing it was sold to do. And unlike a factory that burns down or a product that flops, there were no real assets underneath to salvage. The value had never truly existed. It was confidence, printed as a number, and the moment the confidence broke, so did the number. The dominoes fell fast. Regulators descended on the company. The body that oversees medical labs found the condition so serious that it banned Holmes from owning or running a laboratory for 2 years. Walgreens cut ties and later sued. Partnerships evaporated. The Securities and Exchange Commission charged Holmes and her second-in-command, Ramesh Balwani, with massive fraud, accusing them of raising more than $700 million from investors on the back of false claims. But the financial collapse was only the beginning, because for the first time, the question being asked was no longer whether the company had failed. It was whether a crime had been committed, and the answer would come from a courtroom. What followed was one of the most closely watched fraud trials in modern American history. For months, the woman who had been celebrated as a visionary sat in a federal court as former employees, investors, and patients testified about what Theranos had really done. The defense argued she was a true believer who genuinely thought the technology would work, an entrepreneur whose dream simply failed. The prosecution argued something far simpler, that she had knowingly lied over and over to investors and to patients.
Let me just start by saying, and I'll talk about that decision to transition our systems to the FDA framework, which led us right now.
And that people had been harmed because of it. The jury sided with the prosecution. Elizabeth Holmes was found guilty of fraud. She was sentenced to more than 11 years in federal prison. Her former partner, Balwani, was convicted separately and sentenced to nearly 13 years. The youngest self-made female billionaire in the world had become one of the most infamous convicted fraudsters of her generation. And this is where the story stops being about one woman and starts being about everyone who let it happen. Because the most uncomfortable lesson of Theranos is not that one person lied. People lie. The real lesson is how many smart, powerful, experienced people chose to believe her, and how easy it was for them to do so. Investors poured in hundreds of millions without ever demanding to see the technology truly, independently tested. Famous board members lent their names without understanding the science. Journalists wrote glowing profiles. The whole system, built to catch exactly this kind of deception, simply did not. Because the story was too good and the founder too compelling. Everyone wanted the miracle to be real. So almost nobody asked the hardest question: does this actually work? Theranos did not collapse because of one bad machine. It collapsed because an entire ecosystem of money, power, and prestige decided that believing was easier than checking. Holmes told the world what it wanted to hear, and for more than a decade, the world rewarded her for it with billions of dollars and the trust of millions of patients. The Edison was supposed to need just a single drop of blood. In the end, the most revealing thing about Theranos was not a drop of blood at all. It was a simple question that almost nobody in a position of power was willing to ask out loud, until it was far too late. No sides, no politics, just the receipts. Count the zeros.